But Psalm chapter 6, I just want to talk tonight about God's power. I just want to talk about how good and how big and how powerful our God is. We've lived through, we've talked about it, we're all annoyed with talking about it probably. But we've lived through a crazy year. And in that crazy year, we've been presented by our government and media with the concept that we can't survive without the government. We can't survive without the media. We can't survive without a mask. We can't survive without a vaccine. We're not going to make it. But I believe that God is all powerful. And when it comes to a Christian, we have to grasp that truth. Now, that does not mean that God doesn't give us helps along the way. It does not mean that He doesn't give us medical procedures that help us. If it weren't for a medical procedure, Brother Steve wouldn't be here. He had his heart rebuilt by the doctors. Thank God that there's some people that have investigated and worked and taken time and effort and education to get to a point where they could take a man, open his heart, or open his chest, reach into his heart, stop that heart, rebuild it, put it back together, and here we have him. So I'm not at all, don't misconstrue what I'm saying. I'm thankful for medical doctors. I'm thankful for that. But we can't give them all power. I'm thankful for the government and for the things that they do. And some of the things are good, honestly. Some of the things are good the government does. The freeways that Brother Gordy travels on, that's a government thing. It wouldn't happen if the government didn't unify and do it. Our states would be all scattered abroad if there weren't some unification. Now, I believe, like many of you, that the government takes too much power in themselves and try to monitor and limit and control every aspect of our lives. And that's probably human nature and the government's nature for sure. But I want to just point out, just for a few minutes, using this passage of Scripture, I'm going to read it and read verses 1 through 10, and then we're going to jump right into just a few thoughts about it. I'm going to give you the background, if you will, of the psalm. Bounce over another verse and just try to prove to you that God's all-powerful all the time. Humanity is not, but God is. Listen as I read these few verses. Verse number 1 there of Psalm chapter 6. O Lord, rebuke me not in thine anger, neither chasten me in thy hot displeasure. Have mercy upon me, O Lord, for I am weak. O Lord, heal me, for my bones are vexed. My soul is also sore vexed, but thou, O Lord, how long? Return, O Lord, deliver my soul. O save me for thy mercy's sake. For in death there is no remembrance of thee, and in the grave who shall give thanks? Give thee thanks. I am weary with my groanings all the night. Make I my bed to swim. I water my couch with my tears. Mine eye is consumed because of grief. It waxeth old because of all mine enemies. Depart from me, all you workers of iniquity, for the Lord hath heard the voice of my weeping. The Lord hath heard my supplication. The Lord will receive my prayer. Let all mine enemies be ashamed and sore vexed, and let them return and be ashamed suddenly. Interesting passage of Scripture written by David. It was written by David around the time that David had gone through the darkest, if you will, the darkest days of his life, probably the darkest days of his life, when he backslid, for lack of a better term. He was supposed to be out to the battle. He stayed home. While he was home, he was up walking in the king's palace, walking up on the top of the king's palace, flat roof, if you will. And while he was walking along in the palace, he looked down and he saw a young lady bathing herself. Now, I've heard, and through the years, I've heard people say, well, number one, why was she bathing on the roof? Well, that's where they bathed. Well, why would they bathe up there? They would put tanks up there, big old tanks, and they would collect the water. Through the daytime, that water would heat up. At night, there were certain times where the Jewish law was where a woman would go and clean themselves. So the women had access to clean themselves, and then the men had access to clean themselves. David was not where he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be out to battle. He stayed home because he's getting older and tired. And while he was home, he backslid. He did stuff he wasn't supposed to do. The violation of this situation was totally on the back of David. And David's admitting that here. David admitted that in Psalm chapter 51. So David looked upon this woman. He lusted after her, yearned after her, even though he had a number of wives at this point. But yet he had her brought before him and took advantage of her, while her husband was out to battle for Israel. He found out who her husband was. In short order, she sends a letter back that she's expecting a baby. He decides that he's going to conjure up a plan, calls her husband home, and to deliver a message to him about the battle. He comes home, not assuming anything, gives him the message about the battle. David says, go home to your wife. But this man had some character, unlike David at this point in his life. And this man refused to go home and be with his wife. Reason being, because my brethren are out at the battle. I'm not going to go enjoy the pleasures of home while these men are out to battle. David was trying to cover up his sin. And a charactered man came along and didn't give him good enough access. So David did the next best thing. Certainly in his mind, he sent a message by the hand of Uriah, her husband, out to battle Joab, and sent him the message to put the battle in array. That means get it started, get it fired up. So he was to attack, if you will. And then about halfway amidst the attack, David was to instruct all those part of the attack to go forward. But as soon as he gives a signal, pull back. But he was going to give an incognito signal. And it ended up leaving Uriah out there open. All the men went out to fight. They pulled back at order of the king. Uriah didn't know what the pullback signal was. He didn't pull back. He kept fighting like he was supposed to and died in battle. David had orchestrated a cover-up for his vicious sin. It's after David finds out that God knew about it, which, just let me say, God always knows. We might hide it from others. We might come up with the perfect murder, but God knows. And God knew, and God took care of David. God sent his man, and the prophet comes to David, and old Nathan, the prophet, sticks his finger in David's nose and says an illustration, and uses illustration. A rich man comes and needs a lamb. He goes to the poor man. All the poor man has to his whole name is this ewe lamb that he's raised from a baby, and he has it, has nurtured it, loves it. And this rich man, instead of going to his fields and taking one of his sheep, goes out and takes this man's sheep. David gets irate. And David wants to kill the man. Remember, David was a shepherd. He loved the sheep. And so David gets irate and says, tell me where that man is, I'll kill him. And Nathan looks at him and points to him and says, thou art the man. You took something precious from somebody. You took a life from somebody. And you ruined a home and a family because you wanted something. Your selfishness destroyed a family, and ultimately that's what happened. And the truth of the matter is, David is smitten, not only because he's caught. We know the heart of David. The book of Psalms teaches us the heart of David. And through that heart, we see that David's a pretty soft-hearted guy. And David didn't want to do wrong. It didn't dawn. How many times have we done wrong and it hasn't dawned on us the gravity of the wrong that we've done? We've hurt somebody and we didn't intend to hurt anybody. We were just doing what we wanted to do. We didn't count the cost. We didn't plan the ramifications of our behavior. David did that very thing. And now David, after the facts, looking back and saying, boy, I messed up. I didn't only mess me up, but I messed all these people up in the way. And so David writes this psalm, in essence, pleading with God to give him another chance. Can I just tell you, aren't we glad we have a gracious God that gives us another chance? Many of us have been through a lot in our lives. Many of us have been through a lot in our lives that we're not too proud of. Many of us have been through a lot in our lives that we have brought on ourselves. And as we go through life, and sometimes we get beat up by those misbehaviors and misdeeds in our background, what an amazing thought that God will take us in the condition we were and make us something worthwhile. Think of that for just a moment. That's what David's going through. And as he writes this psalm, that's what he's saying. He's asking for forgiveness. He's asking for God to bless him. And this was used by the Israelites in years to come as a kind of a psalm to encourage when we mess up or blow it or fail God. This was a psalm that many would run to and get encouragement that God will forgive. And God can put you back on, but we have to have the right kind of heart. Oftentimes we look back at Saul, and the difference between Saul and David is when Saul was caught when he did wrong, Saul would blame somebody else. No, they told me to do it, or they did it, or it's because of them, or that's the reason I did it, and it was their fault. He never took the blame on himself. You can't help reading Psalm chapter 6 and see David's blaming David. You can't help reading Psalm chapter 51 where David's pleading to God to restore the mess up that he's done. You see David aiming at him. Listen, let me say, we're human. We're going to mess up. If we mess up, let's be quick to take the blame. Don't put it on someone else. It really isn't their fault. And we need to be quick to do that. And David uses that. And I want to springboard from that. Here you have David in a weakened state, if you will. I mean, he's heartbroken. Heartbroken, he's frustrated with himself, angry with himself. Laura, I'll tell you, if something happens, I mess something up, I beat me up. There is nobody breathing air that will beat me up more than me. She said that before. She says, you're so hard on yourself. And I said, well, baby, because I messed up, because I'm stupid. She says, you're not stupid. Yes, I am. No, you're not. I know me. I know what stupid is. That's me. And there are times when I get that distraught with myself. And I hate it. I do. I get frustrated and weary just because of my own foolishness. But God has a special verse, I think, to help us when we get to that point in our lives. Turn your Bibles over to Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40. Many of us can associate with David. I think probably all of us at some point can say, you know what, I'm going to go as far as David did. I didn't have someone murdered. I didn't commit adultery. I didn't commit adultery, have someone murdered, connive and conspire to have him killed. I didn't do that, but some of the stuff I done is pretty bad. And oftentimes the devil of all people is going to sit on our shoulder when we mess up. And many times when we're doing good, the devil will sit on our shoulder and remind us of stuff we done 10, 15, 20 years ago. And in essence, tell us in our ear that you ain't worthy of God blessing you ever. You ain't worthy. Or they'll tell us in the midst of God's blessing, you'll hear the devil say, if in an audible voice, just wait. The gauntlet's fixing to drop on you, dude. You know it's coming because remember what you did a while back? And in our hearts and our minds, we've asked for forgiveness. We've changed our ways. We've corrected things, but we live a little bit in fear. And sometimes that can get us to a point where depression sets in, frustration, and we just become useless to God and useless to ourselves because we're living in such a frustrating position. Here in Isaiah chapter 40, and of course we're familiar with these verses to follow, but I want to point this verse out here and just pull a few things out of here and we're done. Isaiah 40 verse 29, the Bible says, He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might, He increaseth strength. He giveth power to the faint, to them that have no might, He increaseth strength. David is frustrated. David is frustrated to the max with himself. And the punishment, it causes the death of Uriah, but the punishment causes the death of a baby. The punishment carries on and causes the death of the Israelites as God punished the Israelites for David's misbehavior. And it goes on and on and on in David's life as his son Abner messes up, as his son Absalom messes up, and it causes his family to, in essence, fall apart. And David is at wit's end with himself, with a situation that he personally created. But God here tells us something using Isaiah's words here. And he wants to remind us that in that low position that we're in, he wants to remind us that this power comes from him. He giveth power to the faint. That word faint means weary. You ever been there before? You ever been weary, worn out? And have you ever woken up and you've gotten a good night's rest? Everything's good. You should be okay. And yet you're just wiped out. And you just don't know why. Sometimes it's just because sheer frustration over the situation one might be in, or the devil being hard on us, or just oppression. We don't always know the why. But I want to remind you that today that the Bible here tells us that God's the one that gives power. And who does he give the power to? The strong? The faint. The faint. When we're down is when he's coming through for us. I love that little, I don't know if it's a poem, I don't know what it is, the writing about the footprints in the sand, and we've heard it over and over again. Boy, what an encouragement to our hearts as the story is told, and footprints in the sand indicating going through life, and through the footprints in the sand, we got hold of God, and there's two sets of footprints, but it seems like every time we get to the dark, hard times of life, there's only one set of footprints. And the child of God looks to God and says, God, where were you? I needed you. These are the darkest periods of my life. Why did you leave me alone? And what a blessed thought when God looks back and says, child, you misunderstand. Those are my footprints. I'm carrying you through those hard times. And what a blessed thought it is that during the hard times of life, that's where God is. During the difficult times, the times where you just don't think you can make it through, that's when God's carrying you. God gives power to the faint. First of all, he gives us strength, that power to the faint. And then number two, I put down here, the sluggish. Look what it says in that second part. And to them that have no might. To them that have no might. What does he mean there? That word might means generative power. That means when we need something done, we go do it. We got the energy to go do it. But what happens when I don't have any might? I don't have any ability to generate energy. I remember years ago, I was actually out on Ray Abbott's yard. I was cutting up a tree for him. It had fallen. And I was there by myself. And I only had a limited time to do what I had to do. And I had my chainsaw and I cut and cut and cut and cut and cut. And I was in a t-shirt and a pair of jeans. And everything on me, every stitch of clothing was sopping wet because it was hot. But I had to get this done. I was determined to get that done. I was out there cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. I was so busy cutting and cutting, and most of you know I run around taking the cup and drinking it and drinking it and drinking it. And I was so busy cutting and trying to get this tree cut up, put on the trailer and home because I had stuff to do. I was at a deadline on myself. I was trying to hurry and get it done. And I remember I got to a point where, I had nothing. I bent over and I picked up a branch and I'm trying to carry it. And I'm just shaking, just shaking and sweating profusely and just, there wasn't nothing else. And I remember I finally sat down on the very branch I was supposed to be moving because there was nothing there. And I remember talking to God and saying, Lord, I have nothing. But I have a deadline to meet. There was a family outing or something I had to be at, and I had to do it. I had to get this done for Brother Rand. And in my mind, I put probably too much pressure on myself. I got to get this done, Lord. It's amazing in just those few moments sitting there praying and talking to God. The strength he gave me to be able to get up and move that last branch and set it down. And I didn't finish the job completely. I had to go back and make it. But the Lord got me home and got me through it. There's times where we just have no more energy. That's what he's talking about here. When we're sluggish and wore down, then there's a God that'll take over. And he will pick us up and he will carry us along and he will strengthen us in those mighty moments where we really need him. Look what the latter portion of that passage said. He increaseth strength. He increaseth strength. If you look up that word increaseth, you'll find it means to become great. He'll take my little bitty strength and make it great. I told you this morning, I was leery about singing those two songs back to back like that. In fact, I was supposed to try to get a few verses for Sam to read so I could have a little break. He could talk for a minute. I could catch my breath. I was going to get a swig of water and then maybe sing song number 2. I was worried about it. Problem is, I never gave Sam any scriptures to read, and I didn't get water up here for me to swig on. And so I stood up here, and after I sang the first song, I was winded. And I said, Lord, please, you got to help me. And you know what? Somehow he did. Now you say, well, that's just a silly little thing. It might be to you, but there was a whole lot of eyeballs. If you add everybody up that was here today, and I don't think we took a count this morning, so I don't know how many was here, but however many was here is times 2 for those with 2 eyes, and it should be times 4 for those with 4 eyes. So there was a lot of eyeballs looking at me. It's a bit intimidating. And so I really didn't want to mess up. I don't mind messing up. I do it quite frequently. I really do mind. I don't like to, but I do it. And I can deal with it, but I really didn't want to. And I certainly didn't want to. We had a good service going. The flow was going good. And I'm thinking, I'm going to blow this. I'm going to get up and just blow it. And it's going to be horrible. And so when I prayed to the Lord, Lord, please, God, help me. It meant something to me. And I'm awful glad that he reached down and said, here, son, I'll give you a little boost. And I was able to get through that and able to get through the message and able to finish. And it encouraged me. I didn't have the strength, but God gave it to me. All I want to say in this verse, he giveth power to the faint, and to them that have the might, he increaseth strength. He is the one. He is the one. Listen, it's been a rough year. We've struggled. We've had difficulties. We've had problems. Can I just give you some fair warning? There's probably some more ahead. There's probably some dark days for some of us to have to go through. There's probably some situations we really don't want to have to deal with. I just want to remind you that when you're going through those, make sure you run to God. If you try to do it yourself, you're going to find out how really weak you are. And to be honest, you are really weak. But with him factoring in, he will give power to the faint. To them that have no might, he'll increase strength. So when you're faint, when you have no might, that's when he takes over. Let me encourage you. Would you start heading down that way? Head it off at the pass. Lord, I'm struggling here. Help me. Lord, I'm having a hard time here. Help me. God, I want to be something for you. I'll make a difference for you. But Lord, I'm running on empty. Help me. And tonight I just want to remind you, he will. He will. And if you need an example of that, you need look no further than the book of Psalms and the life of David. Messed up. Got God involved. And what God did for him after that incident is pretty amazing. God will still use us. In fact, God still wants to use us even after we mess up. Let's let him. Our Heavenly Father. Just a few words to try to encourage us. Lord, it's been a tough year and a half. Lord, it may be some rough times ahead for us. Lord, I pray that you'd help us to realize that you're there and you want us to rest in your arms. You can grant peace that we truly can't understand. You can help us and you actually give us strength when we're weak, when we're faint. You're there for us. Lord, I pray that you just help us to realize that we can count on you because you got this. Pray that you'd bless us, Lord, and bless us as we go.